This is a forum we've established just recently. This is a part of a continuing series coming from a bunch of concerned citizens around race relations in the community of Clayton. I'm pretty excited about tonight's event. We've assembled a star cast of local educators. You can see them up on your screen. But before I introduce them, I want to talk a little bit about myself. I'm like, how am I qualified to be your moderator? Well, not really. I don't really have the qualifications, but I can tell you, as a white man with 2 Black children, I have a first seat in the story of race in Clayton. And I'm sure I'm much like all of you. When you move to Clayton, you think, wow, what a great town. It's just this little enclave, small, family first, you know, friendly, pedestrian friendly, all of it. And it seemed like the perfect place to bring our family. Now I looked at the census and I realized, wow, we're gonna move the numbers with our one family, and got a little concerned, but as soon as we were here, it was like instantaneous. Amazing that we were pulled into soccer teams, into cross-country teams, everything. We felt like we were part of it, full stop. And then I started to realize something that was part of my own blind spots. You know, one day, you know, my son came home and learned the N-word. He was called the N-word, and he didn't even know what that word was. He had never heard it in our household. And I said, my God, he learned it at school. And not only that, he was crying. He knew it was hurtful. He knew it was meant to be mean. He just didn't understand it. And that night, I got a call from the principal, and she shared with me, she's like, you know, I made it all okay. By the end of our conversations, they were friends again. And I talked to my son that night, and he said, you know, I don't want to be his friend. And I just realized it was so important for us to gloss over what had happened, to make it okay for all of us that there was nothing that happened that day. But for my son, he sat there just knowing that something had happened. And so that started the conversation at home. I bought all the videos, I put them all in. I said, I need to do my job. I have not been doing my job here. So, you know, I can tell you many more stories, and they're subtle. Like, you know, the time my kid was called out with 2 other white kids standing right next to him. I was the only parent there. They said, where's your parent? And I said, I'm the only parent here, and that's my son. They said, oh, and he walked off. And he didn't ask the question of the other 2 kids. And I just was like, whoa. So, I mean, I can tell you more stories, but there's plausible explanations for all the stories. And I really want to protect the dignity of my children to not go there, because I don't want the counter story of why it could have been okay. But it's more to ask the question. It's like, in our colorblindness and our belief, our desperate belief that we're all, you know, seeing everyone for what they are we missing something big? So, you know, now on to our mission. What I appreciate about Clayton is when you drive in, you see the do the right thing. And, you know, they recently made a proclamation about, you know, standing against racism and inclusion for all people, regardless of stripes. And I realized, like, do the right thing means do the right thing for all people. And that's really what this series is about, do the right thing for all people. So, you know, we put together this star panel, local educators, and we needed a little bit of a framework to kind of talk about it. And what we kind of came up with is, when you have a problem, first, before you can solve a problem, you have to see it, right? You got to acknowledge there's a problem. You know, not all of us may see that there's a problem. Well, once you see the problem, you go, well, is it my problem? And so then you decide, do I own this problem? And then, you know, once you decide to own it, you're like, oof, I got to solve it. And you start thinking, well, what can I do to solve it? And that's what I call solve it. And then, you know, once you've got a solution in your hands, you got to go and affect change. You got to go and do it. So see it, own it, solve it, do it. So, and I want to put out there, it's okay wherever you're on the journey. If you don't see it, that's cool. Maybe some of the educators here will say what they see, and maybe you'll start to see a little bit. You know, if you're wherever, it's all okay. So let's put up this first survey question, number 1, to see where you guys are. I see no problems with inclusion, Clayton. I see that Clayton could be more inclusive, but I don't feel like it's my problem. I feel a sense of ownership in making Clayton more inclusive, but I'm not really sure how. I have many ideas on how to make it inclusive, but you know what? I haven't even started doing anything. And I've really, and the last answer is I've started doing stuff. I'm in action. So go for it. So while you're thinking about that, I have some requests for you. First, I want to acknowledge you guys, the the audience, because, you know, it means you're engaged and you're listening and you want to have the conversation. I mean, and I want to acknowledge also that this is a weird forum, right? Where we're supposed to be having a conversation, but I can't see you and I can't really talk to you, and you see all of us. So really we're just talking to each other, and I want to acknowledge that at some level, but I do want to invite you to use the chat, right? And make sure you use the chat, you pick everybody. Because if you pick everybody, we can get the whole community having a conversation. And there are people looking at the chat, and what we're gonna do is collect that feedback on the chat. So when you're thinking about how you chat with emotional responses to something you hear. Or if you've got a solid answer you just want to get out there and you want to make sure it's collected, or if you want ideas for the future, just put them out there. We will collect all this information because we really do want to build on this story and make even better panels in the future, because we're just learning our way through this. So I think we can close the question maybe, or maybe we're still waiting for questions to be answered. Wow. I can't tell you how excited I am by these responses. That means this community as a whole is exactly what I thought it was, right? We are a place where we're very committed to inclusion. And maybe we're not there, but you know what? We've got folks who are already in action, so that's pretty huge. So now we're going to go on to our panelists, and you know, in order for them to get a chance to talk, I wanted them to each have their moment. So we're going to kind of go in order. I do want it to eventually be a dialogue where we're all just chatting, but for now, let's just go in order so they can each talk. So we're going to start with, let me find you on the screen, Sarah. Sarah is from Gale Ranch, once a Clayton resident and went to our schools. So we have a firsthand experience right here. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Sarah. Like Steve said, I teach at Gale Ranch Middle School. This is my second year teaching. I will be transferring from general education to special education this year. I still live in Clayton. I just work over in San Ramon now, but I grew up here. I was born and raised in the same area. And so I feel very attached to the community. I tend to be very proud of where I'm from. And that includes all aspects, ethnicity, my school, etc. So it takes a lot to say that this town has caused me hurt and my whole family. But that I have used this to inform my teaching. I drive my educational, profession from my experiences, and I make sure that with my experiences, I'm able to show other students and my colleagues that I will not do any harm to them. I will not let people experience what I have experienced. And my experiences in this regard probably started back in 2001. It's a very scary year for everybody, but ironically, it's really a very time-changing year for anybody from the Middle East, South Asia, Arab world, or passing as any of the such, whether or not you are Muslim or Christian. So in 2001, I'm sitting in my kindergarten class, and we're watching Between the Lions during language arts, and Between the Lions is on PBS. PBS changes into the news, and all of a sudden the newscaster starts talking about, what happened in New York and Afghanistan. And as soon as the word Afghanistan came up, somehow everyone's looking at me in the class, including the teacher. And I couldn't understand why. So for me, they're bad people. To me, they're the whole reason my parents live in America. So I couldn't understand why that was all of a sudden associated with me, This didn't stop, unfortunately, and I called this the post-2001 era. I say I went to school after 2001. Friends started changing. My, classmates started monitoring, or my classmates' parents started monitoring who I was hanging out with and who I wasn't hanging out with. All of a sudden, I wasn't invited to certain birthday parties. Growing up, soccer teams, people started being friends with certain people on the team and not me. Nicknames poured in very quickly as soon as, it became regular language. And I remember a shift, and there was one particular day when my principal was doing a read aloud, and she was reading about holidays, and she said, "What's Ramadan?" And she asked the whole class of 30 people, and she didn't know herself. And I asked, and I actually didn't want to raise my hand and tell her. And so I realized that this was changing me. I started to find my voice later, and I used this to consciously choose an educational program that would help me be a better teacher. As a teacher, nobody called me Miss O. I make sure everybody says my name and my students' names correctly, because this perpetuates inclusivity in my classroom. I make sure my decor and my books that I make available and read to my students weekly are inclusive. I make sure that everybody feels safe in my classroom, because it's where they should feel safe. Students shouldn't feel any other way in a classroom. And I do this so that we can build community. As adults and as educators and as a community, it's our responsibility to make our community inclusive, because if we don't make it inclusive, it's not going to be a successful one.
Beautiful. I mean, I love how you've turned pain into strength, which is awesome, and creating safety for others. Beautiful. Catherine comes from Mount Diablo Elementary, right down the street. Catherine.
Hi, my name is Catherine Erickson. As Steve said, I currently teach at MDE. I've taught 4th and 5th grade there for the past 3 years. I grew up right over the hill in Walnut Creek. I went to Walnut Acres, Foothill, graduated from Northgate. I eventually got my BA from UC Santa Barbara, and then eventually my teaching credential from Mills College in Oakland, roughly 10 years ago. I began my teaching career close to Mills in San Lorenzo. I taught there for a number of years before my family and I moved closer out this way. And I taught in Bay Point for 2 years before I finally transferred over to MDE, which was a wonderful decision on my part. I love my job. I love where I teach. I immediately felt the community very welcoming to me, my coworkers, parents, students. I hope to teach there for as long as you all will let me. One thing that I did notice when I made the change over to MDE was that this was the first school that I taught at that was very similar location-wise, but also demographically to how I grew up, the schools that I went to. And on the one hand, that was very comforting for me. It was very familiar, and I felt a lot of nostalgia. And because there were a lot of things that were being done in the same way that I experienced them as a child. And some of that is great, you know, like the events, the Fall Fest, the fundraisers, all of those sort of activities. I think it's wonderful. But another thing that I did notice was that a lot of the lessons that were being taught, the books that were being read, unfortunately, probably even some of the textbooks that were being used were the same, if not similar, to what I had when I was a child. And I got into education with the mindset of that I want to make a difference. I want to see some change in the world around me and in the community where I teach. And if you want to do that, if you find yourself in education wanting to make a change, you have to start with your classroom and with your school. Nothing is going to change outside those walls if you don't change what you're doing in your classroom. As for me, as an adult, I had to, you know, unlearn a lot of things I learned as a child, or I discovered new information that I felt was left out, especially when it comes to history and social studies. You know, even now, sometimes I'll read an article and say, oh, I didn't know that. Why didn't I know that? And so over the past couple of years, I saw this quote and I've sort of taken it on as one of my teaching philosophies, which is teach them early what you learned late. And, you know, some of these new bits of information that I am now receiving as an adult have really changed my worldview. And there's no reason why we can't tell kids these same things, kindergartners even, in an age appropriate way, but they need to know these things as well. And us as teachers and educators, we need to keep that in mind. If we want to make a change on the outside, we need to work with what's going on in our lesson books.
What's the one thing you would tell parents of kids going to Mount Diablo?
Oh, to not be afraid to have those conversations. I'm thinking back to my last day of distance learning in May, I guess it was June, whatever that was. And I was just going to do a quick goodbye, you know, sort of, we're all exhausted, have a good summer. And my students were the ones that were bringing up George Floyd. I was teaching 4th grade, and I hadn't I wasn't expecting that as well, but it reminded me that they want to talk about these things. They see it. They know what's going on. They want someone, they need an adult to explain it to them. And so, yeah, that was a wild last day of school, but we got through it and we did have a good conversation. And it even me, I wasn't even going to do it. I was like, let's just be done with this. And they were so hungry. Tell me what's going on. Can you explain this to me? So as parents at home, don't be afraid to have those conversations.
That's a very powerful message, actually. That's beautiful. Janine, oh, you're up in the right-hand corner. Hello, Janine. Janine comes to us from Diablo. We are now getting into middle school. Tell us about middle school.
Hi, I'm Janine, like Stephen said. I've been a teacher in Mount Diablo School District for 23 years. I started my career teaching 5th grade in Concord at El Monte Elementary, and for the past 16 years, I've been at Diablo View. I currently teach 8th grade English and US history. I was motivated to join this effort to improve race relations in Clayton after I heard our Black community members speak downtown during the second protest. In particular, when I heard the children and young adults speak about what it was like to grow up in our town and go to school in our town. I recognize those kids. I know those kids. Some of those kids are my students, and it just really just hurt me to see how much they hurt and see the pain that they felt at our schools. So I knew that we need to do better. So I didn't need for them to tell me, though, that there was racism in our schools. It's not blatant or obvious as it once was, but it's there. I see it in more subtle and unconscious ways. I have heard from some students about something that someone else did or said that was racist, but most middle schoolers don't tell. They don't tell teachers. They don't. The last thing a middle schooler wants is any attention put on him or herself. So they don't tell. I've also heard from former students recently that they didn't tell because they didn't think anything would change if they did. Racism was something that they just accepted. That is terrible. They should not have to. We do not need to accept racism. It's not okay. So our children shouldn't have to hide their pain. So what does that mean? I'm here for the conversation. I don't claim to be an expert or know all the answers. I know that we need to do better to build inclusion at our site. We need to have the conversations, as Catherine was talking about. Look, we live in a community where we have a lot of good, smart, kind kids, and sometimes we look at that and we think we don't need to talk about race with them, but that's ignoring race and that's ignoring our Black and brown students. So we need to have the conversations, whether we think we need to or not, we do. I'm a parent. I feel like it's important to me as a parent to have conversations with my own children, but I also need to start springboarding more conversations in my classroom that might be awkward at first, or I might feel like I'm putting some of my Black students on the spot. If I talk about it, of course, wouldn't do that, but we need to have the conversations even if they're awkward. So I'm just excited to go forward with this and figure out how we as educators could make our classrooms and our site more inclusive for all students.
Amazing. I do know that if I had known you were there, I would have sent my son straight over because it's so nice to have advocates for your children. And it's just.
Oh, I need to work that. And I want to add too that I need to figure out how to make it easier known and talking to students that I am an ally, that I am their friend, that I'm there for them. And I can't just assume that they know because I said it once at the beginning of the year. I think that I need to be better at that.
That's awesome. So now we're going to switch to Jasmine, and she's a vice principal at Oak Grove Middle School.
Yes, thank you. My name is, again, Jasmine Montgomery. I have been in education over 15 years. 13 of those years have been as a teacher in the classroom, and 2 have been as a vice principal currently at Oak Grove Middle School. Education, being an educator is a challenge, and sometimes being a Black educator adds to that element with that challenge. And so I'm just going to share a quick story. About 5 years ago, before school started, a parent went and approached the principal and requested that their child be taken out of my class. The principal granted that request to the parent without my acknowledgement. She felt justified in doing that, and she shared it with a colleague, which that colleague later shared with me. And I was very hurt and shocked by the action. Some people who know me and as an educator and a person that I have a strong passion for education. I have a very high standard for myself professionally, and those high standards translate into my students having great results on tests. And so my students were showing great improvement and growth. And what was so hurtful at that moment with the principal deciding to take the student out of my class was that none of that mattered. None of that mattered of my passion and my experience and my professionalism for the students in my class and their performance. It was that I was Black. And the one thing that got me through that was with my colleagues at the school, my fellow teachers. They were inclusive, they were allies. They saw the bias, they saw the injustice, and they made a conscious decision to speak out. They did not stay silent, and they spoke out against it, and that's what made a difference. And it was my colleagues that were not of color and colleagues that were of color. And so if there's one thing I leave with you all in the community and for us all to think of, and what I learned from that experience, is that we all have to make a conscious decision when we see a bias, when we see an injustice, that we make an effort to speak up, because that shows the inclusiveness, that shows that you are an ally. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I know in my own personal experience, allies are huge. It's like when you are feeling other and part of the majority reaches out to you, it's just, it's so uplifting. Thank you for sharing that. Now we're going to switch over to the high school, and we've got Irvin from Clayton Valley. Why don't you take it next? Irvin.
How you doing? Okay, there it is. Yes, Irvin from Clayton Valley High School. I've been at Clayton Valley for 7 years. This is my 8th year starting. I teach statistics and I teach calculus. And actually, I started the school. When I started the school, I applied to the school because it was a charter, and charters are dear to my heart because they're about quick change. And if I see something, then I can come as an educator to get change. At the school, when I came in, I looked up at the board, and when I was applying to the school, and I saw the staff was there was no color in the staff picture for the whole school. And so I knew that being a part of the change would be me coming there and being some of that color that students could see. And while I was there, I also noticed that a lot of the students were not taking a 4th year math. And so I built in a statistics curriculum for the students that was A through G approved, that I had built in at a school previous to Clayton Valley, and brought that to the school to start building in ability to see and understand what bias means in the classroom at the statistics curriculum. And then created a classroom culture where students were able to bring in their own experience into the statistical world. They would go out and find what they were interested in and bring that into the classroom. Also, with the way my classroom looked and was set up, I put in leaders that were of different races and different ethnicities up in my classroom, and I even got more information from other teachers when they saw I started doing that. Other teachers gave me more stuff to put up, and I put it all up on the wall. And so by doing that, I was able to create a classroom where the students felt comfortable coming in. I had students that came into my classroom and talked to me about their religion, and was able to then exercise their religion during a prep period that I had, so the student could honor their culture. I had other students come in and work on things, and my classroom is very, very diverse in my lunch period because I kind of keep it open so students can come in and have a place to stay. The students are allowed to be who they are in the classroom. Clayton Valley is not all the way there yet, but they're making strides. I feel like I'm part of that change to help keep that going. And so I'm always compelled to stay there, because even though I feel like the staff is not as diverse as the population, and I would also say that the administration is not diverse as the staff. So it kind of trickles down and up. But I think that being there and having a voice there is big and paramount. And I would also like to say that for a finishing statement, that just when you go to an area, if you look around and you don't see other things being represented or people aren't being represented, just take a pause and understand that if you don't see the inclusion, it is not an inclusive environment.
Irvin, what I love about your story is that you used education, statistics of science to then prove the case that unconscious bias exists. I mean, that's great. That's brilliant.
I spend a lot of time. My first lesson is about bias and understanding how asking questions and who you are as a person. You bring that to everything that you do. When you walk in, it is about you, and that is your immediate bias, and you have to build from there.
Great, beautiful. Jim, why don't you take it from there? How are we gonna get Clayton Valley where it needs to be?
Liz Abbott.
Oh, sorry, Liz, I skipped somebody. I jumped over. Liz, it's your time. Liz is also from Clayton Valley.
I can go after Jim.
No, perfect. I just skipped, go for it.
Okay, I'm Liz Abbott, and I teach at Clayton Valley. I grew up in Concord. I went to Clayton Valley. I've been teaching English and photography there for 19 years. In that time, I have seen a lot of good things and some not so good things. Throughout it all, I have tried to be an ally to those who seem to need one, and this includes my coworkers as well as my students. I've been an ally to some of the Black teachers who have come through Clayton Valley, supporting them in their desire to be the best teacher they can be. I'm the advisor to the Spectrum Club, which is Clayton Valley's LGBTQ+ club, a club for them and their supporters. And I have provided a safe place for everyone in that club to be who they are. I stood with my students as they participated in raising the pride flag this June in Clayton for the first time. The first time it was raised, that is. Additionally, I was the advisor for the Multicultural Club for 10 years at Clayton Valley. And each year we put on an assembly in which we asked the students to represent a culture that they felt an attachment to or a bond with. Many kids who would not have otherwise stepped into the limelight did so for this assembly. But obviously, one day a year is not enough. So every day should be a day in which we welcome people and celebrate our differences and provide a safe place for them to be who they are. And I want to do that, you know, more so in my classroom, more so at Clayton Valley in general, and by extension in our town.
Great. There's no question that you're on the action end of the spectrum, which is really great. And yeah, I think we're all hearing a theme that I think people think to solve the big problem that the solutions are complicated, and allyship is so simple in so many ways. It's just showing that you're there for people. And I think, so I would love for people to take that away. If like you do nothing else, just be an ally. Beautiful. Jim, now it's your turn.
Yeah, good evening. You know, as I think the newest person to Clayton or the Clayton community on this call, I was going to give an example of a prior life. Very early in my education career, I did learn that the expectations that students achieve are the ones set by the adults in front of them in the education system. And I wanted to bookend that with two stories because there's a positive bookend to this that came to my attention yesterday that I think is appropriate for this conversation. But the first part of that comes with a young man back in 2005 at the high school, which is part of the system where I worked for 12 years before I came out to Clayton, who was the valedictorian of the class of 2005 at Sacramento Charter High School, a young Black man named Jimmy Haney. And in March of his senior year as the valedictorian, he found out that he was not qualified to apply to UC Davis or Sac State or any of the public colleges in California. And not qualified from a GPA point, but not qualified because he didn't take the right classes. And he didn't take the right classes because nobody told him which classes to take. As the valedictorian, he obviously got an A in every single class. He had a 4.0 or, you know, one of those 4.2 or 4.3s that we see kids have now. But at our school, that was unacceptable. And so we actually changed the graduation requirements. So we changed the expectations for our students. And following that class, students had to meet a higher bar to graduate from the high school so that they could have access to those four-year colleges and have those opportunities. And I think if I flip that around, a senior that I recall, her name's Kiana Williamson. I can share her name too, because she's also a public figure. She was graduating the class of 2012, and she actually got a Gates Millennium Scholarship, which is a pretty amazing thing to earn. She was looking for a high school that matched the expectations she had for herself. She found ours, which was great, but she didn't have the means to explore her options for college. And so we ended up sponsoring her to be able to go out to the East Coast and visit different schools and different colleges and figure out which one was best for her. She landed at Howard. And the bookend of this is that I just found out yesterday, she is now in a position as an editor at the Sacramento Bee. And so when you have those expectations for students and you give them those opportunities, they will rise to the challenge, they will rise to those expectations, and then they will find themselves eventually in those seats that once they were looking up to and never saw anyone who looked like them. And so I think, you know, it's important that we have those expectations, but it's also important that we lock them in from a structural standpoint so that our students are not falling through the cracks wherever they come from, whatever their background is. And we make sure that the system itself is the thing that is promoting those high expectations and moving them to higher and higher levels. So, and I do appreciate being part of this conversation tonight. So thank you.
No, that's great. I mean, I think we don't realize sometimes that when we unconsciously place lower expectations on people, they fulfill those expectations. And so we're all inadvertently creating the situation that we say doesn't exist. So it's pretty dramatic. So thank you for that. Moving on to Northgate, we've got Christine.
Hi, my name is Christine Reimer. I'm embarking on my 25th year of teaching high school. I am not from Clayton. I originally grew up in Merced, California, which is quite a bit more diverse than Clayton. And then I went to St. Mary's College and decided to be a history major. And as a history major, you had to pick 3 different concentrations to focus on. And one of the ones I chose was African American history. And I absolutely adored the professor of that class, Dr. Gretchen Lemke Santangelo. But I realized that I learned so much more in that class than I did in any of my other history classes. And I realized early that I wanted to be a teacher. And I felt very committed to using all those notes in those books. I still use all of those in my classes. And I felt very committed to ensuring that in my classes, I'm using instructional materials that students can see themselves in, that they can see themselves in history, that we study together the contributions of people of color and of women, and that students make a connection with the very important history, and they can see the tapestry that is the United States, that there's all these wonderful contributions and that people have different experiences, and it helps for students to learn empathy and perspective. And my hope is that students find a safe place to learn in my classroom, and that they want to be the kind of learners to reach their fullest potential and to see that they can all do really great things. And this has been a very rough 5, 6, 7 months for all of us. But the thing that gives me the most hope is these young people that we teach, the emails that they write to me, the things that they want to do, the projects that they have, the ideas that they have. This is super important. And I think we need to invest our time in these kids. They are amazing and they have great ideas.
Thank you for that. Just infusing it into your educational practice. Awesome. Now we have Kelly Cooper, also from Northgate.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Cooper. I am the new principal at Northgate High School. I have served there for 3 years as a vice principal, and I'm excited to take this role with the school and with my community there. I grew up in Concord. I went to Ignatia Valley High School, and then I taught there for 17 years. And I think my focus on equity and inclusion started there in my classroom. I taught physiology, and physiology is an advanced lab science. It generally, comes junior or senior year. And what's with the focus of some really great administrators I was working with at the time, what we noticed was, I took over and there were 2 sections. And kids weren't signing up for it because there was a prerequisite somebody had written in that they had to have first passed biology with like a C or better. And we noticed that that actually wasn't a thing. It wasn't a rule that was in the course of study that was approved by the board. It wasn't a thing. It was something that was built in, this barrier that was built in for kids. So as soon as that barrier was removed, administration started putting more students in my physiology class, students that hadn't been successful in biology, and it kind of unlocked a lot of doors for them. They not only got their grad requirements because they were able to find success in physiology, but many of them became A through G eligible, like what Jim was talking about, because they've gotten their 3rd year of lab science. And so my 2 sections grew to 4 sections. I started a physiology honors course, and it just grew from there. And I think one of the biggest, compliments or drivers of my motivation is that, many of these students then went on to look into healthcare or even just love science again. So that's kind of where my lens started, is what are these barriers that are in place in education that actually don't have a purpose other than to be barriers.
Right.
And so that's kind of my focus.
Yeah, no, acknowledging structural problems and removing that is huge, huge.
Mm-hmm.
We have Tammy. She's going to share a little bit. She comes from Bancroft.
Thank you. My family went to Clayton 21 years ago, and I've worked for a quarter of a century as an elementary school office secretary within this district. 15 years before that at an organization called the Center for New Americans, which served immigrants and refugees in this area. My children and grandchildren have attended public schools in Concord, Walnut Creek, and Clayton. I've seen many things and heard many stories from students, parents, educators, and my neighbors. I applaud the teachers and administrators who give children a worldview and help them appreciate diversity. My grandfather was a bigot, yet his daughter, my mother, managed to raise 7 children, all of whom came to have a more tolerant and informed view of our fellow beings. We have mostly married outside of societal expectations for our time and place, which was Omaha, Nebraska in the 70s. Not a very diverse environment. One sibling married a Black woman, one a Hispanic man, one a Middle Easterner, one a rancher's daughter, and one stately sister, a man quite a few inches shorter in stature. A derogatory comment that grandparent I mentioned made when I was 7 about an individual standing on a street corner near my home who I knew he'd never met set me on a lifelong quest to investigate the causes of prejudice and the means for its eradication. And that search led me to a global community of which I'm now a member, which makes me a religious minority in Clayton. I'm a Baha'i. The Baha'i World Community has been working for nearly 100 years towards the eradication of all forms of prejudice and encourage dialogue and action. So I'm also very appreciative of this venue. A quote on my desk for many years reads, "I used to wonder why somebody doesn't do something about that. Then I realized I am somebody." I think if you're human, as Irvin mentioned earlier, you have internal biases, gender, cultural, racial, generational. And the task for us is to be able to separate observation from judgment and to recognize the inherent nobility of each person. I've come to believe the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens.
So what I love about your story is turning a lifelong of education. Like, I mean, you've sent me more titles than I could possibly read in a lifetime, which is great, which means it's something we can all do, is just become more educated ourselves about the topic. So now you've heard from everybody. and I wanted to just pulse you guys. So this question is a simple yes, no question. Did this discussion move the needle for you? Terry, you want to put the question up? Number 2. I think there's a question out there. There it is. Okay. Did the educator stories increase your interest in making Clayton a more inclusive community? So wherever you were on that spectrum before, did the needle move? So we'll just let you think about that one. So now we're going to go a little bit more into freeform mode and just kind of put out some questions and let educators jump in. Do you guys want hard or easy questions first? Let's start with a relatively easy one. Is there a key moment that made you realize that this is what I need to do? Go for it. Anyone want to take that one?
I think the story I shared with my grandfather when I was young, and realizing that in making a judgment simply from looking at a person about what kind of a person that was, made me wonder where that idea came from. And I knew that I didn't want to have that outlook. I sought out people who were different from me. I ended up at a high school of which I was one of a handful of people who looked like me. I was one of 5 white persons, and only 2 of which were female. And I think that I've always had a sense of the fact that we are noble beings, we're called to be noble beings, and that more and more the situation in the world is propelling us to be more of a global community, have more of a global outlook. I think that's the next stage in our collective evolution, if you will. So I think any steps that people are taking towards moving us in that direction and recognizing that our diversity is really our strength. And in teaching children that and giving them a sense of connectedness and a sense of place in the world and a sense of their purpose and as I say, their inherent ability. So I look for materials and publications that help me strengthen my understanding about that fact of who we really are. And I'm so happy to see that there are so many educators and teachers who are now focusing in that direction, whether it be a recent thing or whether it be a quest that they've been on simply because of being around students and recognizing their needs.
Can I share too a story? First year as a vice principal at Oak Grove Middle School, there was an altercation between 2 Black boys that happened on a basketball court, and they were sharing racial slurs with each other on being Black, just racial slurs. So I was tasked with investigating the situation, pulled both of them back into my office, talked with them individually, and as a Black person, I was shocked that these two boys, I was talking with them and sharing, why would you say these things to each other? Why do you think that that's okay? And one had shared, he was a mixed Black boy, and the other boy was African descent Black boy, and he had shared that, the mixed boy said, we do that. We call each other names, and that's what we do at school. And it was fine. And we've done that in the past, but all of a sudden he just got upset, and that's how the fight started. And so he didn't know that it would really hurt him because they've done it in the past. And so I talked with them, I had them reconcile, repair the relationship. But after the boy, one of the young men came up to me that was mixed and shared with me that the other boy, after they had the altercation, he kind of helped him get up because they were kind of friends before. He shared that he wanted to kill himself. And so immediately when I heard him say that, I then talked with the gentleman, made sure we contacted the parent, make sure we made sure he was okay, and had a deeper conversation. what we found out that this young boy was being bullied for years. He was an 8th grader with racial slurs about being Black. And he put on his armor every day, and he joked about it. He joked with people who were Black kids too about it. And that day he had enough. And that moment that really spoke to me has that bullying, that name calling, those racial slurs, they hurt. Some people might put on that armor and choke about it, but it hurts, and it needs to stop. And I took it upon myself that wasn't enough. I can't let these two boys go and say, okay, now everything's fine. So I told, part of their consequence was that they had to meet with me every lunch for about 4 weeks. And we read Langston Hughes poems, and we read The Beauty of Being Black. And I had them read it out loud, and we read it together. And I had them write their own poem about being Black, because I knew that there was something that there was action that needed to happen there, and there needed to be an inclusion, and knowing that they are beautiful and that their identity is not racial slurs.
I think people, and this has come up several times today, which people don't realize that, you know, especially as they get to middle school, they don't want to share the pain that they're going through. And my own kids, my older especially, has shared stories, but only after severe provocation, because he never wanted me to know. And it was all retrospective, things that had happened 1 year, 2 year, 5, like he had been collecting these stories, and I had no idea that they were actually occurring, which is just terrible.
Steve, I want to tag on to what Jasmine, what you were saying, because similar experience, that something that happened several years ago, but I've been thinking about it more recently as I've been taking part in these discussions. Several years ago, I assigned a history project to a group of students, to my students, and they were to form a group and choose something in history to do a newscast about. And this one group was 4 white girls and 1 boy, and the boy was Black. They were going to do a newscast about the raid at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, led by an abolitionist named John Brown. So students went to videotape these newscasts, and I didn't see them until they were finished, because they videotape parts of each day in different rooms and around the wing. And so when I watched this one particular newscast, I was horrified to see that instead of the raid at Harper's Ferry, what they decided to reenact was John Brown's execution, where he was hanged, complete with a noose that they put around the Black boy's neck. And it was awful. It was to what I called them in, and I asked them why would they do that, and what were they thinking? The worst part about the video is that they were all laughing. They laughed throughout the whole thing, all of them, even the boy. And I asked them why they were laughing, why they chose this, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They didn't get it. They didn't think there was anything wrong with it, because it was in the history book. And I looked at the boy and I said, how could you think that's okay to put a noose around your neck? And he just kind of shrugged at me, like, I don't know, it's fine. And so after this happened, these kids, I don't think ever really got it. And looking back, I needed to do more than I did. I gave them a 0, and that seemed to be what made them the most mad at me. They were angry for a long time. In fact, another teacher came to me and asked me if she thought I was being too harsh. I asked her if she saw the video, and she said no. And I told her about it, and she said, oh, well, that's him. He always jokes about being Black. And I'm like, that's not okay. But you know, that was what he did to survive. Looking back, I've heard from him since that was his armor. He pretended to be making fun of himself. He pretended he made jokes all the time. He was the class clown. That's how he survived middle school. So I tell you the story because I'm sharing it, but also I wish that I would have done more than just get mad at them. I was very mad at all of them. And I should have used it to teach more about accountability and why it was wrong. Because looking back now and thinking about it, I really don't think that girl, I don't know that they knew. I don't know what they knew, but I should have investigated more.
Yeah. Intense. We have some questions coming in, and I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to see if I can address some of the questions that are coming in. Oh, we got an answer. Oh my gosh. We moved the needle. 94%. That's awesome, guys. That is beautiful. I love it. Let me make sure I can find these questions.
Do teachers get training and support for how to manage these situations?
Do teachers get training on how to manage these situations? Does anyone want to take that one? Go for it, Catherine.
No, we don't. That's the short answer. No, we don't. And well, I don't, maybe I shouldn't give a blanket statement like that. It varies administrator to administrator and district to district that I have been in. When I taught in San Lorenzo, there was more conversations about social emotional learning and things like that, but sadly not too much in Mount Diablo. And I think something that I've noticed that I've since been teaching in this district is that I feel it's a big district and there are lots of different schools within this area with varying demographics. And because when I taught in Bay Point and when I'm now teaching in Mount Diablo, that's the same district. And everything is rolled out to every school the same. And I think that, you know, different schools have different needs. Even at the high school, we have Ignatia Valley, we have Northgate that are two, very different schools experiencing very different things. And I think that it needs to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed differently because, teaching about inclusion and equity and race at Mount Diablo is very important to me, but I go about it in a different way because I am teaching predominantly white children. And that conversation looks and sounds very different than teaching children of color because, talking about biases and experiences, I do a lesson on what a bias is as well with my 4th and 5th graders. And that's a different conversation to have with a white child than it is to have with a Black child or a Hispanic child or a Muslim child. And I've always felt that the details were never addressed in Mount Diablo. Sometimes at a staff meeting at the beginning of the year, we get a equity, be nice to each other, I don't know, whatever, here's a PowerPoint. And everyone's getting the same thing. And then we sort of move on and we move on to other trainings. There's also a STEM training, this is the new way you're taking attendance training. This is the new math training. We still don't have a math curriculum. What are we going to do about that conversation? There's so many things, and sometimes it's brought up in a blankety sort of way, and then we move on to the next thing. And I think prioritizing that and really looking at the details and the demographics is a next step that I would like to see.
So it sounds like, we should push for curricula, push for training. Now, how could we get the system to change? How have you been able to move the needle on getting other teachers onboarded to this or administration?
Can I just speak a little bit?
Yep, Kelly, go for it.
Oh, sorry, Urban, go ahead. I'll go after Urban.
I was just going to answer Stephen's current question. I think you were going to talk about something earlier, Kelly, so go ahead.
Go for it.
See, I'm getting you. Our previous conversation. I do want to say in defense, I guess, of there have been some, again, I'm always looking at positive things, right? So there have been great strides by Mount Diablo. They have a whole equity inclusion team at the district office. And recently, especially, they have taken the efforts, long efforts to train the administrators. I was part of a 2-day training in a cohort. And then it's incumbent on the administrators to then, as Catherine mentioned, to prioritize it as a staff focus, right? And so then we are to take that training and then bring it to our staff and make it a goal school-wide. And so I think that is something that just site by site, they have to decide. I mean, obviously this year, we are all facing an entire shift in our educational system, and that's the priority right now. But as we're able to widen our vision again, I know for me, it's a huge focus for me. When you, Stephen, asked about what the what the motivation was, it's my students, it's the student experience, and I have heard of some pretty negative ones from my students of color, and that's not okay. And so I think that being able to focus on the student experience and how might we make this better is what administrators need to choose to do. You're muted. You're muted.
Do parents have a role in making that a priority for administrators? What can parents do to make that priority?
I think, well, do you want me to?
Go for
Somebody
it.
else can answer. Oh.
And then we'll get back to Irvin. Yep.
My 2-second answer to that would be, well, not 2 seconds. It kind of, yes, parents are always partners. Absolutely. And I think that for me, what I would want to hear is, they might hear things that we're not hearing. The kids might come home and talk to them about what happened at school, and we just don't know about it. So being partners in our environment and partners in what's going on within our community is hugely important.
That's a good.
Steve, I just want to jump back really quick to like programs that schools implement, and just say that my administrator has been great about implementing some programs at our school. We've done the Upstander program and tried to get kids to speak up for others. We've done It All Starts with Hello. We've done a lot of activities to try to build inclusion at our site. So if there's any teachers out there that teach at my site, I want to let you know that I am acknowledging that we have made a lot of strides. We have done some work. There's more to do, which is why I'm here. But I am saying that there has been some efforts made, and it's not just as simple sometimes as a program. You can't just adopt a program. We've got to continue the work. We've got to, like Catherine, you were saying, sometimes we go to these trainings and it's, we're all amped up, we're ready to go, we do it, and then we get into our jobs and we get into work mode, and it just gets overwhelming, and we just can't let programs about inclusion sit on the wayside. We've got to take the
So we've got a very powerful question coming from a local student that said, what can a student do if they have a negative experience with a teacher racially?
Hi, Nia. So, Miss Abbott, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I can speak from both sides. So I think I forgot to mention earlier, I graduated Clayton Valley in 2013. So I went there when it was Clayton Valley High School, but I also went there when it was the first year of the charter. So I understand where you're coming from. I've experienced racism as a student and as a teacher both. So for me personally, it was something that made me realize when it was happening so often that I started coming out a lot and talking about it towards people. I ended up, some people like to see it as you standing up for yourself when you talk. And some people like to see it as, oh, they're rude, or they're this, or they have a bad attitude. And I think the first step to doing something about it is realizing that what other people think about how you feel truly does not matter. Because at the end of the day, how you feel isn't going to change their opinion if they feel a certain way. So you need to make sure that you understand that your feelings are important first, and then finding the safe person you can talk to. And I know I sound like a complete teacher when I say that, but if you have a safe person on campus, that can be the custodian, it can be the lunchroom person, it can be one of your teachers, a club advisor. A lot of the times I find that like students tend to be closer to their club advisors or their teachers than their teachers, but sometimes it's both. So for me, it's funny, the person I was close to, probably two of them are right here on this group chat, which is crazy to me. So when you find that if something like that happens, telling anybody on campus is going to take it off of you, the responsibility, but also what it does is, especially if it's someone that you're close to, that adult tends to know that you trust them, especially if you're a student of color. We kind of have like a sensor of like, we can tell we're like probably one of the only people that you trust on campus to tell that kind of stuff. So when you tell that adult, moves will be made. We definitely take your opinion into account too. But what happens when you tell us is that we're able to see it more, which means we're able to catch it more, because chances are if no one's done anything yet, and it's the same thing that happens to you or whoever it is, if it keeps happening, we don't know that it's coming out. We don't know that it's happening yet. So when you tell someone on campus that you're safe, that you feel safe with, it brings awareness to us. Then we're also able to, if it needs to be, have a conversation about it on our end and what we can do. So
So let me share a few stories here real quickly, because I've experienced this firsthand, right? There was the second time my older son was called the N-word, he gathered his friends, and he knew, because I had told him, you have your support, and he went to the administration. And the other child was by themselves, basically, because he had gathered his group. And so the principal was telling me about this, and I asked her, so she told me all that she had done. You know, kid got in trouble. I said, did you ever think to acknowledge my son for doing the right thing? And she's like, oh my gosh, I forgot. And I'm like, I said, so the next day she made it right. She went back out there and took him out of class and made it right. So the second thing that happened was someone exposed a knife to my son. And he pretended it didn't happen. And he, all day, and he found the administrator at the end of the day. And his identity was never revealed. The student does not know that, it's like, but it's like giving a child that kind of courage to be able to do that is the whole story. And I think that's what we're all saying here, is that there does need to be an adult that comes into the story and giving them that strength and that power to either gather their friends or to do what they need to do, or to, have the strength and conviction to go out there when they can feel safe, ultimately, is the answer for me. Whoa, sorry. Alrighty then, what was the next question? So I don't think we ever gave Irvin a chance to talk. So I want to make sure that he gets a chance here. Do you still want to speak on what you were thinking of?
I do, but I feel like it was the question that you asked. I want to make sure that I got it clear. You were asking about how do you build a community in the school system for teachers. Can you review the question to make sure I'm answering it right?
Yeah, no, you can. There's no specific question here. It's like, how do you create the network ultimately that you want to create, whether among teachers or with administrators, to make inclusion a priority?
Okay, so for me, what I was going to say is, a lot of times you feel like you're in a silo as a teacher, and so then it's kind of this is honestly sheer how this works. You stumble upon another teacher that's kind of doing the same thing, and you find out like, oh yeah, they're doing this, and so then you kind of build that network there, and then you find an administrator who is going to be able to take it to the appropriate levels. And then you kind of build a network there, because it has to be an administrator teacher relationship, so that the students can feel safe and feel like something is going to happen. The same thing with the counselors, finding a counselor who is going to take initiative. I will say that that it is incumbent upon the people who care to see things, to follow it through. Because sometimes things get kind of sent up the ladder, and then somebody needs to go back around and circle back and check on people. The mental state of the young people in that situation that have had the wrong done to them, the mental state for the young people who did the wrong, both of them need to be checked on in terms of how they can improve themselves, and using a teacher network, meaning, like, for instance, I talk to the next teacher that they're going to have. I talk to the teacher after that, and I pass that information on and say, hey, watch out for the kid. He had a bad day or whatever, and these things can go on, so forth and so on. I had a student that was in my classroom, and two kids were kind of making jokes and making fun of him, not knowing that the kid had just lost his family. He had just lost his dad like 2 days ago, and you end up with a teachable moment in that situation, because the kid gets really upset. He storms out. He ends up accidentally injuring another person as he stormed out. And I had to kind of walk through. It was like, hey, you got to let this kid get a pass on this situation, because you know, the kid was amped up because of him losing his family. So let's not throw the book at the kid because of what happened there, and kind of like start building in. And then I also went back and double back to the young man who perpetrated the situation, because they kind of wanted to be like, it's not my fault, or mea culpa. And I'm like, listen, you had as much to do with this situation as that person did, because you enticed that situation. You need to be aware of it. So that's what I discussed.
Very cool.
Stephen, I'm wondering if there isn't a way to add a feature to the district website. When you go to the homepage, there are resources for parents, there are resources for community members. Would it not be a possibility to ask the district or TIS to add something that teachers can add stories and solutions and resources to that revolve around this issue? I'm just putting it out there, thinking it would be good for everybody in the district to have access to all of these stories and to solutions that educators have found to help children, to help their classmates and their peers, and to help themselves.
So that's a great lead into a survey question. Let's try it. Survey question number 3. See if it can come up. So what do you believe can make the biggest difference in having our children be more inclusive of others? Nothing needs to be done. More conversations at home, more inclusive curricula for children at school, more training for teachers, more focused efforts by administration. So if you had to pick one, where do you go? I might ask the same question of our educators. I know. Who wants to? Well, maybe we'll let people think on that before you give the answers away. I'm sure there's. There was a question to Jim, a Clayton resident, asked, how can we capture the disparities that exist for our students at the school? How can we overcome them? How do we understand them? What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I think the first question is a little easier because as public schools, there are troves of data that's out there, and you can look at that information and pretty easily see some of the issues that exist. So I would encourage folks to take advantage of the data that schools have to report on their results, whether they're demographics. And by the way, there's demographics out there for staff and for students, as well as the academic results that are out there. And that's a great way that, again, you can't hide from that. It's not subjective. Either you're getting the results or you're not. And so I think that that's a good place to start, because then you're also having a conversation where everyone's starting from the same kind of base level. And you're trying to talk towards solutions, and it's not personal. It's about, hey, how do we move all of our students to achieve at this level and have these opportunities? And what are the students who are achieving doing that all of our students can have the opportunity to do to get to that level? It sounded like there were a couple of subparts to that question that I didn't quite catch. So was there a second part to that? And again, I would just encourage folks to start with that.
Well, maybe if you can share, are there things you've observed at Clayton Valley, and are there kind of action plans already to try to correct for the things that you're already seeing?
So I think a couple of things that we've done, again, I don't think Clayton Valley is perfect. I think we have a long way to go. But a couple of things we've done is we've increased our essentially like our social emotional support for students. So we've added a full-time MFT to our staff. We've added an additional psychologist to our staff. We've added 2 additional counselors, and the additional counselors really help because they drive down the caseload for our counselors, and then our counselors can have one-on-one conversations with kids twice a year as our goal. We even have a counselor who's dedicated 100% to our special education students. So she has a very small caseload of about 170, 175 kids, but she can give them a lot more attention, a lot more support to be able to push their achievement and push the things that they need at that level versus a traditional guidance counselor who may have 400 or 500 students on their caseload. So there's some of those pieces. We've also raised the expectations for students in terms of graduation requirements and those types of things. And we've tried to start exposing them to opportunities. Since I came on board, Urban's worked with our Black Student Union, and we've sponsored them going to the HBCU fair, which has been held in Antioch the last 2 years. I believe it's open to all students, and we pay for a bus to take them out there, and they get that experience and that exposure. And then this past year, we took all of our students in 9th grade, all 530 of them, to different colleges and universities across Northern California to give them that exposure, because that's an experience that all of our kids should have, and an opportunity all of our kids should be looking towards as an option for them after high school. So there are some things we've done. I think that there's a lot more we need to do, but we have a decent start, and I know we've got a lot of allies at the school who are willing to put themselves out there and work real hard to make sure our kids are getting those opportunities.
That's great. So let's see, do we have survey results yet? Survey says more inclusive curricula for the school, children's school. Wow. Interesting. So why, I know we made people make a hard choice, because of course you would do all of it, right? So, but if you were going to take one action, where would you guys start? Who wants to take that one? Of the teachers, go for it.
Just quickly, when Kelly was talking earlier, it sort of made me thinking about, got me thinking about hiring practices, because Kelly is right that the district did put out, some, training exercises, but it was up to individual administrators, I think, how much focus they were going to put into it, how much effort. And Kelly obviously is doing a great job at Northgate, but again, then that goes out to site by site. So some sites were probably getting it more in depth. I mean, I know actually that some sites were getting it more in depth than others. And so in addition to training for teachers and the curriculum, I also think that it needs to be the administrator attitudes needs to be a thought process when hiring. Are we hiring more administrators, people at the top that will make this a priority and will really push their teachers to implement the curriculum? And, like Irvin said, like, you are sort of in a silo, even teacher to teacher, an administrator can say, this is our curriculum, I really want you to do it. And then maybe some teachers are super into it, and some teachers are like, okay, I'm just going to read this and, get on with it. When you have someone at the top that really is making it a priority, that trickles down. And so I think the district and school sites should also be looking at who are they hiring to be in charge of schools and also to do the teaching in their schools.
So let's take the town of Clayton, right? And let's say we've got parents and community members on the phone and on the computer. Where should they start? Should they start by going to their local elementary school and start with the principal, let's say, or do they start with the town council to say, hey, that Clayton is a town that stands for this, and where do they start relative to that hierarchy of things? Because going all the way to the top is not easy always. Where would you say start? Go for it.
I'm just gonna go real quick, and I would say I think we should start with each other, like yourself, because what you learn for yourself, and then when you go to advocate, you have something specific to advocate. If you just say I want inclusion and you don't have any basis on how to get inclusion or even what should be being spoken of, I think that coming from a place of a learned place where you have taken some time to research, and I think it's incumbent upon us to maybe put some curriculum or put some things out there on the website so that people can go and do some learning for themselves if we pointed to the correct thing. But I really feel like it's an internal thing, and then it'll come out with, this is what we have to do, instead of this is being mandated to us.
I saw both Kelly and Jasmine wanted to take this. Start with Jasmine maybe, and then we'll switch over to Kelly. Cool.
Sure, thank you. So I wanted to share too, when we talk about our community at Clayton, I want to share that there's resources at the district with the board. So recently the board had voted for what is it called? A board resolution for equality, condemning violence, tolerance, and injustice. So there's actions that the board approved that schools and sites should follow. And that's on the website with the board minute, So you can find that there. So that's a place you can start as a parent to feel empowered that you're not on your own. You do have the board at Mount Diablo Unified School District supporting that equity. And then also having that backed up with the board, you could feel like your voice has that power to say, well, this is also a resolution that the board has. So I think too, knowing, feeling empowered and knowing that there are resources out there. There's a multicultural group, parent group that they have in Mount Diablo Unified School District too, that supports the equity work for the equity department. So there's resources and there's the support and empowering your voice as a parent.
Great information. Kelly?
So I say this with all the respect and love for teachers. Teachers sometimes get a little married to their curriculum, right? They love what they teach, and they get, especially our very experienced teachers. And so I've had some difficult conversations around curriculum that, for example, with the English department, right? So they get married to these books, and I think what really changes things, like what Irvin said, is changing the perspective from the having the teachers see what their choices, what impact their choices have on the students. And so I think that my conversation in the last year was around a student experience in a teacher's class while they were reading A Time to Kill, not A Time to Kill, what's that? To Kill a Mockingbird. That's the book. And it was a very rich conversation with the teachers, but it can't be me saying you can't teach this book, right? We're not banning books, and that's not a thing. But it is incumbent upon a teacher to say, am I representing every student in my classroom with the curriculum that I'm choosing? And what I'm really excited about is I've seen that change happen with some of the teachers. I've seen them now reach out and they want to find some books, and I saw a question in this chat about, are we only talking about African-American students? No, we're talking about all our students, Latinx. We have, there's mandated LGBTQ curriculum that should be brought into our history classes. I mean, there's so much to add into and so rich, and Christine's doing a really great job of that. She mentioned in the beginning, but it has to come from the teacher wanting to look at their own curriculum and make new choices.
Yeah, and I would just like to piggyback on that. It's not just this issue. We have to create a culture on all of our campuses that teachers want to continue to learn and to continue to be lifelong learners and become better teachers every day, and seek out new resources. And sometimes the best ideas come from a question that a student asks, and I realize I can explain that, but I don't have an activity or a lesson to really encompass what that means. And so we go on a deep dive, and that's pretty much what I've been doing all summer, is this deep dive of trying to find things that are going to be relevant. And so it's part of that, creating a culture of professionalism, really, that we want to continue to do better every day and seek out those resources that are going to help our kids connect with the curriculum.
So I was going to add on to Kelly and Christine just now, but Nia just added in a comment that kind of touches on almost what I was going to say. So To Kill a Mockingbird is interesting because growing up, I thought it was one of my favorite books. And I grew up and kind of realized it's actually not super diverse, but creates a dangerous classroom environment. So this is really a teacher per teacher question, what Nia has brought up. However, I think it's important to note that, there's always conversations about erasing history and how we can't erase history. The book is there, the book is written. The conversation that revolves around what happens in the book when the slur comes up and what students do and don't do is definitely dictated by how the teacher manages that classroom, and putting confidence in that educator that to avoid that conversation would be doing harm to not only any Black student or African-American student in that classroom, but be doing harm to everybody else in that classroom because they wouldn't know any better from it. So having that conversation is mandatory, and I have good faith that these educators in this room and outside of this, virtual room would be doing so. But to add on to just, you know, creating any kind of classroom environment, it would also depend if that's the first time that that has happened, or if that was the first time you heard some sort of word like that, or seen any kind of book that touches any kind of diversity, you know? Looking around the classroom, chances are, like, you know, if there's To Kill a Mockingbird, there's probably also Hatchet. And then you have Brave New World, you have Great Gatsby, you have all these other books that represent a certain type of person. How often are you going to see, you know, people that look like you in the book? That also can attribute to it, that it could contribute to the shock factor. And so as educators, but also even as, you know, at home, look in your bookshelf and see, what do you have? You know, as a child, the first time I remember seeing someone that looked relatively like me was not in a book. It was on Disney Channel in Proud Family, when there was not even the same ethnicity as me. It was just someone that shared my religion. And it was not even a good light. It was an Islamophobic attack where somebody vandalized a Muslim student's house on the Proud Family. But, you know, and it's not a good feeling. So as educators, what we can do is make sure that we're not only trying to make our classroom reflective by what we have and how we teach in the books that we have. Is it, do you have authors and protagonists that are reflecting your student population, but also those that are not in our student population? You know, just because you don't have anybody that's Indigenous in your class doesn't mean that you shouldn't have authors and protagonists in your books that are Indigenous.
So Sarah,
And,
you're going exactly where I was gonna go. Let me just.
oh, for sure, go, yeah.
Stop you
If
for a
that's what we
second.
can do.
5 minutes.
So, you know, the hardest question is like we've got a panel that are clearly committed to inclusion, right? And we're talking about the importance, and we're basically saying we're hurting people of color, we're hurting the other people who look different by not recognizing that there's these disparities and that they're happening. But if you say that this is a matter of community forcing the conversation, how do you convince an all white or predominantly white community that it's important, not just to not hurt people, but for everybody to have inclusivity as a key priority? So who wants to take the big question?
I would say that what I'm hearing is that we need a multidisciplinary and multi-level approach, and that everybody's coming at this from their own frame of reference. And the important thing, as I see it, is to keep the conversation going. Those who are committed to action, it's like your previous outline points. You know, name it and see it, name it. I think we need those who have knowledge of the problem and the issues, have to also have volition and take action at whatever level we're able to. So the important point, I think, would be that those who recognize that there's work to be done do the best they can where they can in whatever circles they're operating, and that those like you and others who have organized this continue to keep it out there. And I think the more of us talking about it and discussing it and putting it out there, the more people, the more momentum it will gain, you know, until we reach critical mass, and then things really change.
I'm good. That's awesome. Why don't we put up the very last poll question, since we have 4 minutes? And then I want to close while we're letting people think about it. We've got some potential people we could invite in. And so you guys can pick as many of those answers as you want and just say who you'd like to see come up before you. So yeah, first of all, thank you guys, educators. I just, stepping out here and being vulnerable and being in front of your community and knowing that there's a lot of people you don't know listening to you, and exposing yourself to that is just huge. What's clear to me is you all have an intense commitment and passion, whatever circle you're actually, working from. I think as educators, you're obviously, trying to modify curriculum, create access, do the right stuff to get there. The rest of us, some of us aren't educators. I think we've heard a lot of themes, right? It's like, go high, go wherever you feel comfortable going. If you want to go download from the district and learn more about what regs are actually governing your local site, hold them accountable to those regs. If you want to go straight to the principal and decide that that principal could be an ally for making this a priority among teachers and helping teachers support curricula that look a little different, go there. If you want to talk to your teacher, go there. If you just want to start with your children, go there. I think the one thing that becomes incredibly important, and it's this concept of ally, which is kind of a thread that runs through all of it. If the only people who go there are the people who feel afflicted or hurt by the situation, it won't create the movement that will actually change the situation. And we're placing the burden on the victim to change it if that's the case. So it's all us allies and non-victims that really need to make the case. And so what I would argue for parents, just community members alike, just to be that ally. And allyship looks different in many cases. It could be just being that safe space in a classroom to let kids of all types and stripes come in. But it also could be other kinds of allies, whether, at workplaces in the town, when you hear speech that doesn't match the way speech should be, speaking out, don't let it go silent. I mean, so figure out what you'd like to do. Let's see what our results are. Again, thank you, participants. I love that you are listening to us. I love that you're engaging on the chat. You gave us a lot of stuff to process. And here's where we go. Look at, yeah, we've got pretty much, we want to hear from everybody. Kids rocked it. We all want to hear from the kids, me included. So thank you again to everyone. Let's close and have a good night. Totally appreciate it. Bye-bye. Okay, take care.